In his solitude on Tatooine, Obi-Wan's attempt to seclude himself from the rest of the galaxy was interrupted on multiple occasions, the penultimate one of which was by his old adversary Maul and Jedi Padawan Ezra Bridger. The younger Jedi had been trying to sleep aboard the VCX-100 light freighter known as the Ghost, but was interrupted by the voice of Obi-Wan, emitting from the holocron of Kanan Jarrus. This overlapped with the more ominous voice of Maul, and it led Ezra to believe that Obi-Wan was still alive. Against the orders of his superiors, Ezra pursued what other rebels thought to be a lost cause, and with the help of 2 holocrons, he traced the Jedi Master to Tatooine. When he landed on the desert planet, Ezra and Chopper were forced to fend off Tusken raiders and breach the harsh sands. Then, guided by the voice of Maul, they were eventually rescued by Obi-Wan. The Jedi Master told Ezra that he had been lured to his location by Maul, and asking him to leave via Maul's gauntlet fighter known as the Night Brother. Ezra never discovered Obi-Wan's real reason for being on the planet. But what if Ezra had found Luke instead of Obi-Wan? How would this affect Luke's future? How would Obi-Wan react to his secret being discovered? As Ezra and Chopper traversed the brutal climate of Tatooine, the Jedi was growing more and more impatient, but also exhaustion started to set in. Both the young Jedi and the droid were suffering, and after one particularly violent gust of wind, the holocron slipped from Ezra's hand, then dropped to the floor, where it was immediately submerged into the sands. The nearly unconscious Ezra was unaware that this had happened, with his legs operating as if they had a mind of their own, until he fell to the ground. When Ezra next awoke, he was not lying on the coarse sands of Tatooine, but on a considerably colder and tougher surface. As he strained to get to his feet, Ezra saw that he was tied down by his ankles, and when he reached for his lightsaber, he saw that it was missing, with his other equipment and chopper. The voice of Jawas interrupted and clarified his confusion, and given his limited interactions with the scavengers, he tried to improve his situation by loosening his bindings with the Force. Ezra then saw his lightsaber being examined by the Jawas, and summoning it into his hands, he demanded for the rest of his equipment and chopper. The Jawas were now acutely aware of the threat, and decided to guide the Jedi to the bottom level, where the magnetic suction tube was located. Ezra failed to focus on his surroundings, whilst distracted by the humiliation of his situation, and when one of the Jawas pulled a lever next to the machine, he found himself being pulled down. Pushing the lever back into its neutral position with the Force, Ezra was saved by Chopper, who had managed to extricate himself from the other Jawas and droids residing in the cargo hold. Retrieving their possessions from the Jawas, an annoyed Ezra and Chopper left the sandcrawler when the Jedi realised he had lost the holocrons. Before he could return to decapitate the Jawas, Chopper told him that he had already lost the devices before he entered the sandcrawler, and Ezra's frustration was boiling over. Now severely regretting his decision to defy Hera's orders, Ezra was slumping his shoulders as he walked, but Chopper broke his disappointment when he pointed out signs of civilization ahead. Identifying several of the pillar-like machines to be moisture vaporators, Ezra ventured towards the perimeter of the settlement, which was the Great Chod Salt Flat community. Before he could ask for assistance, he was almost blown away by a flashing land speeder, which circled the perimeter to repair another vaporator. Once Ezra put the disorientated Chopper back on its feet, he turned to face the pilot of the land speeder, and the young man introduced himself as Luke Skywalker. Having heard and seen Anakin Skywalker from old recordings of lightsaber techniques, Ezra asked if Luke was perhaps a relative, but Luke was unaware of the connection, as Owen and Beru had been reluctant to tell Luke about his heritage. The young Jedi could see glaring similarities between Luke and Anakin, but wisely kept it to himself, and instead asked if he knew of an Obi-Wan Kenobi. Luke was not aware of an Obi-Wan, but he did know of a Ben Kenobi, who had helped him get out of a number of difficult situations, and Ezra thought that this sounded like the Obi-Wan that they were looking for. Luke wasn't aware of the exact location of Obi-Wan's residence, but he occasionally saw him in the Jundland Wastes. As Luke was about to take Ezra to find Obi-Wan, Uncle Owen burst out of the last homestead, and seeing Ezra's lightsaber hilt on his belt, he ordered for Luke to move away. Ezra was confused by this hostility, and having travelled so far to get to Tatooine, he was not going to be put off by Owen. Asking Owen if he knew where Obi-Wan was located, the moisture farmer grew angrier and even more protective of Luke, but for the boy who always believed he was destined for life beyond Tatooine, he was determined to help Ezra. Beru now emerged from the homestead and calmed the furious Owen, and reminded him that this was inevitable given the boy's ancestry. Owen was displeased, as Luke had been a vital cog in the maintenance of the farm, and with Jabba's escalating water tax, he needed Luke to remain for the next harvest. Luke was oblivious to Owen's grievances, as he was already taking Ezra and Chopper to the Dune Sea, and free of any chaos, Ezra could now sense the powerful Force presence that was Luke. Projecting like a beacon in the Force, Ezra now knew why Obi-Wan was on Tatooine, so it was even more imperative that Maul did not encounter the Jedi Master. Other than the occasional herd of banthas or Eopes, there seemed to be no sign of Obi-Wan or Maul until they spotted a dimly lit fire. Luke stopped the land speeder near the fire, and now they could see the body of Maul positioned on top of a funeral pyre. The wound vertically bisecting his torso was clearly inflicted by a lightsaber, and Ezra now told Luke of what he knew about Obi-Wan. Luke was somewhat surprised that his odd friend Ben Kenobi had been masquerading as a hermit-like figure, but now knowing of his own Force sensitivity, he wondered why he had not been trained. Knowing how sensitive Kanan had been about Order 66, Ezra delicately explained why the Jedi had been reduced to mere myths, and Obi-Wan was one of the last legendary survivors of the Clone War. As they were speaking about the Jedi Master, he soon emerged from the top of a sand dune riding an Eope, and calmly dismounted the creature to greet Ezra and Luke. Gazing at the dying embers of Maul's pyre, his face was one of sympathy at what Maul had been moulded into by the Sith, and he turned his head back to the young Force sensitives. The meeting between Ezra and Luke was unexpected and somewhat unfortunate, but now sensing that Luke had gained his freedom from the Lars, he ushered them to his nearby home. Ezra now remembered why he was even on Tatooine, and asking for Obi-Wan's help to join the rebellion, he was met by a glance to Luke, who was examining the limited furnishings in the humble abode. Obi-Wan, though, was actually considering Ezra's offer despite his initial reservations, with his role as the protector of Luke seemingly at an end, and the Jedi went to his portable holoprojector to seek Bail Organa's advice. The rebel leader was well aware of the value of Luke, both to the future of the Jedi and as a potential foil for the Sith, but the rebellion were also in need of more help. Organa agreed with Obi-Wan on a compromise to allow Luke to join the rebellion, but with Obi-Wan taking the vacant role of Fulcrum, as Ahsoka was missing after her duel with Vader on Malachor. Luke was taken under the wing of the Spectres, whilst being taught the ways of the Jedi by Obi-Wan and occasionally Kanan Jarrus, and also becoming a Fulcrum agent. Switching off the holoprojector, Obi-Wan told Ezra, Luke and Chopper to find Maul's ship, whilst he gathered his limited possessions. Once they were all aboard, Obi-Wan piloted the ship to Chopper Base, whilst Ezra taught Luke all he knew about flying, and the two Jedi could also see that he was keen to study the Force. Once they arrived, the annoyance of the other rebels at Ezra's disregard for their orders was soon replaced by shock and amazement at the sight of Obi-Wan, and they bowed respectfully to the Jedi. The Jedi Master confirmed that the threat of Maul had been nullified before introducing Luke to the Spectres, then leaving the base to begin his first mission as Fulcrum. As Luke absorbed his new surroundings, he was guided to his new makeshift quarters aboard the Ghost, and he had to get to grips with all the Spectres, then his new equipment. Luke was already proficient with any kind of repair tools, as well as blaster rifles, but what was less natural to him were the type of strategies used in a war. Contrary to the life on Tatooine, Luke discovered the life in the Rebel Alliance was hectic, and the unexpected was the new normal. Gradually integrating himself with the Ghost crew through several supply runs, Luke was also rapidly improving his Force affinity, absorbing the knowledge of Kanan, Obi-Wan and Ezra. Despite Ezra's initial reservations that he had been replaced by Luke, the greater goal of retaking Lothal was much more important, and they would need all the help they could get. The decision to ensure Luke's training was as quickly accelerated as possible had immediate consequences for the fortunes of the Rebel Alliance. During a meditation session with Kanan and Ezra, the newest Padawan of the Jedi had a vision of danger occurring on Attalon. Recalling this during his next encounter with Obi-Wan, the Jedi Master warned Luke that the vision could be misleading, but prepared reinforcements for a two-pronged attack. Luke's premonition proved to be accurate, as Agent Kallus had been caught out by Thrawn and the Empire, and Ezra had also seen the threat with even more clarity. As Thrawn imposed a blockade for what he believed to be the main rebel base, the Phoenix Squadron merely served as a distraction as they began a false attack. Thrawn and his 7th Fleet rapidly caught on to the attempted rebel deception, but still believing that the entire rebel fleet and their command was waiting on Attalon, Admiral Cassius Constantine ignored Thrawn's warning and pursued the retreating rebels in his cruise interdicta. Though the rebels are not counted on such a bold manoeuvre, this worked perfectly for the rebel reinforcements, who now only had the chimera of Thrawn to contend with. What the Chiss had not been able to account for, in his meticulous and methodical calculations, was the presence of Luke Skywalker, and at this moment, it would be best for the Empire to cut their losses and retreat. Leaving Admiral Constantine to be pursued by the rebel pincer, Thrawn ordered the rest of the blockade to fall back, and he left the system before the rebel reinforcements captured them. The eventual defeat of Admiral Constantine was a small victory and morale boost for the rebels, despite the loss of the now exposed Chopper base. Luke's strategy in forcing a Thrawn retreat had earned the respect of those in the Phoenix Squadron, but Obi-Wan was concerned that Luke would soon draw the attention of the Empire, and especially the Sith, before he was prepared to face it. Luke, though, had grown attached to the Phoenix Squadron and the Ghost Crew, so it was with great reluctance that Luke was pulled away from Yavin 4, so he could train under Yoda on Dagobah. Having made significant advancements under Obi-Wan and especially Kanan, Yoda was able to expand Luke's repertoire of Force techniques, and occasionally with Obi-Wan, they scoured the galaxy for any holocrons, which had not been looted by the Empire and the Sith. Upon his return to Dagobah on one of these missions, Luke experienced a vision like the one he had done before the battle on Atollon, and with his training nearing its end, Luke was allowed to leave. The Jedi travelled to Yavin 4 and reunited with the Ghost Crew, then warned them to hold off on an attempted attack of Lothal. Ezra disagreed with Luke's vision, as he had one of his own, and the rebellion had just obtained information from former Lothal Governor Ryder Azadi that a new type of TIE Defender was being constructed. Despite this added incentive to help the plight of Lothal, Luke had been warned by Obi-Wan before his return to Yavin 4 that Thrawn would be able to anticipate any kind of infiltration, and the rebel fleet was underpowered for such a mission. Now remembering the advice of Obi-Wan, Luke reluctantly agreed to help the Ghost Crew, knowing how important this mission was to Ezra. Rather than joining the other Spectres in descending to Lothal, Luke had an alternative plan, with which he hoped to surprise Thrawn, and on the approach to Lothal aboard the Broken Horn, the Jedi began on a different descent. Almost aghast at the state of Lothal, and how its life had been removed by the Empire, he placed his spacesuit over his head and took one final glance as Vizago entered the clearance codes requested by the Imperial Defense Fleet. The Jedi entered into the cargo hold and released several of the Crime Lord's cargo crates, which had been carefully disguised as space debris, before joining them in their freefall. Using the Force to mask his presence from the detection of the lifeform scanners, Luke was rather relieved that the crew on the bridge of the Arquitens-class command cruiser had not activated its turbo laser batteries. Vizago and the Broken Horn had provided a sufficient distraction for the Empire to deploy a TIE fighter escort, and Luke ungainly crashed onto the ship with the rest of the crates. Attaching a grappling cable to the ventral turrets of a quad laser cannon, Luke saw two TIE fighters separate from the escort, which were circling to the location of the floating crates near him. Hiding amongst the complex base of the turret, Luke waited for the TIE fighters to complete their search, then quickly crawled to the hangar, which he knew was open and waiting for the TIE fighters to return. At the sight of two officers watching the hangar's entrance, Luke used a Jedi mind trick on them both, so they moved in the opposite direction. Luke now breached the inside of the cruiser, and his eyes lit up as he saw the new elite TIE Defenders already on display. The problem for Luke was that he had no way of communicating with the Spectres without the detection of the Empire, so he decided to be patient and wait for Hera's plan to begin. The Jedi's time was consumed by having to slowly creep through the cruiser, and taking up a good position near the bridge, he utilised the hours of waiting to meditate and study the minds of those around him, until he finally saw the blockade being alerted to the Phoenix Squadron's attack. Seeing the officers mobilising into their battle positions, Luke began mirroring the first phase of Hera's attack by performing battle meditation, both increasing the performance of the rebels and decreasing those of the Empire. Though this helped the rebels punch a hole through the blockade, Luke quickly sensed that the rebels needed something more substantial, as he heard Thrawn was lining up a secondary wave of TIE fighters to deal with any ships which had evaded their first wave of attacks. Emerging from his covert hiding place, the young Jedi moved to the bridge and began to persuade the officers to change the course of their ship to fire at their own fleet. As the command cruiser started to swivel, Luke needed to enact the next phase of his plan, and thankfully Thrawn ordered the officer to deploy the TIE Defender elites. Luke gauged that the Chiss had responded to the sudden movement of the command cruiser, rather than it being part of his original plan, and he had to predict if Thrawn was anticipating a deception or already knew it. Observing the behaviour of the TIE Defender elites, he noticed that they were far superior compared to the Rebel X-Wings, so he decided to activate a kill switch across the TIE Defender elite squadron. Having expected his subordinates to conform to his plan, Thrawn was surprised when the rebels burst past his wilting elite defenders, and Luke set the course of his command cruiser for that of Thrawn's Chimera. Leaving the soon-to-be-destroyed ship via a Lambda-class shuttle, Luke joined Hera and the Phoenix Squadron to finish the destruction of the blockade, before proceeding to Lethal's Imperial Armory complex. With Thrawn's fleet out of action, the rebels swooped in to capitalise on their advantage before Imperial reinforcements arrived in greater numbers. Governor Pryce had been assured by Thrawn that no rebels would be able to make it to the city, so she had not repaired the anti-aircraft turrets sabotaged by the rebels, and now her forces were vulnerable. The rebels divided themselves into two groups, with one targeting the critical fuel depot and the other rescuing the Spectres and rebel spies. Governor Pryce deployed her AT-AT walkers in a desperate attempt to preserve Imperial control, but the rebel ships overwhelmed her and her army. With the Imperial Armory complex destroyed and Thrawn and Pryce unable to cause any further trouble, Ezra was already planning for a way to take over the capital and its infamous dome, which represented the Imperial stranglehold over the planet. The meeting between the Phoenix Squadron and the rebel command is interrupted when Ezra hears a howling in the distance and turns away from their mobile command center. Kanan and Luke hear this as well, and leaving Hera to agree on a plan to take the capital, the three Force users venture into the grass-covered terrain, where they are met by the Loth Wolves. It becomes apparent that Kanan had a close affinity to creatures which had not been recorded on the planet for a century, and through their limited words, they usher the Jedi onto their backs. The Jedi were initially unsure of whether to trust the creatures, but when Lothcats emerged to join them, Ezra assured the other Jedi that the Loth Wolves were trying to help them. The trio of Jedi and their wolves galloped across Lothal, wondering where exactly they were being led to, when they reached a narrow pass hidden amongst the mountains. With the Jedi now on foot, they are guided into a previously unseen tunnel, which was actually a portal to hyperspace. The Loth Wolves were helping the Jedi travel across the planet through hyperspace tunneling, and when they emerged on the other side, they found themselves surrounded by more Loth Wolves, and they were standing in a peculiar semicircle formation. The Jedi looked to the ground and found an unusual yet intricately carved stone slab, which depicted the Lothal Jedi Temple and the Force Wielders. In the aftermath of the Jedi's previous visit, the Empire had assumed control of the temple, and with the other rebels occupied by the capital, the three Jedi would be breaching the defences by themselves. When they approached the area surrounding the temple, Ezra was as shocked as he had been when he saw the exterior of the planet, as the temple was being extracted piece by piece on Palpatine's orders. But with the destruction of the Chimera, it seemed Palpatine was making alternative arrangements. With Minister Varys Hydan now conversing with the Emperor, the rest of the encampment was seemingly captivated by their leader, so the Jedi moved to find the door for their keystone. The painting reflected in the keystone was not far from the Empire's camp, but much to the trio's dismay, the area was both heavily guarded, and the painting was yet to be fully uncovered. As if the situation could not get any worse, the Jedi heard the now distant voice of Palpatine, informing Minister Hydan that Darth Vader was arriving to reassess the progress on Lothal after the demise of Thrawn, Pryce and the blockade. Moving to assess and gather information on the excavation team, it was too vast to use a mind trick, so they had to think of an alternative strategy. Kanan spotted a pile of rubble near the partially exposed doorway, and he lifted it out of the large storage crate, then ordered Luke and Ezra to dash towards the doorway. Kanan turned the mound into a decoy wall, and the younger Jedi ignited their lightsabers to carve a hole in the unexposed area of the doorway, where they unveiled the painting of the Force Wielders. Ezra sincerely wished that Sabine was here to help with the puzzle of the door, given her incredible knowledge of the arts, but fortunately Kanan, who had been busy reinforcing the wall to delay the Imperials, was on hand to help. As the voices of the excavation team were now confused at the presence of the wall, Ezra touched the hand of the daughter, and as the Loth Wolves in the painting moved to create a portal, the Jedi stepped through. Still confused as to why the rebels had led them to this mysterious realm, the answer soon arrives when Luke spots an unusual looking convor on top of one of the portals. The young Jedi looked into the portal, and at the sight of Darth Vader, his eyes narrowed to the one who had betrayed Anakin Skywalker, then diverted to Ahsoka Tano, who Obi-Wan had spoken highly about. Before he attempted to perform a double act, the calm hand of Kanan rested on his shoulder and told Luke that he could not eliminate Vader, considering all the events which had taken place in between the duel on Malachor and the present. Opting instead to save the exiled Jedi, they reached through the portal to drag Ahsoka back to safety before Vader could decapitate her. As the Togruta absorbed her new surroundings, she appeared to be slightly dazed until her eyes fell upon Lukeskywalker, and she knew immediately that this was the child of Anakin and Padme. Kanan diverted Ahsoka's attention away from Luke and onto a much more pressing and threatening matter, which was their escape. The power of the world between worlds cannot be allowed to fall into the hands of the Empire, but they also needed to avoid the inevitable Imperial presence, which would meet them if they used the same exit as their entrance. Luke suggested that they split into pairs, with Ahsoka and himself leaving through the portal, whilst Kanan and Ezra went to the one on Malachor 5, where they could attempt to contact Hera and the other rebels. With every second that passed by them, the probability of Vader standing outside of the Lothal portal increased, and they were forced to agree with Luke's risk-laden plan. Running in separate directions, Kanan and Ezra reached their portal first, and they tumbled out of the ground to a different-looking Malachor. The once towering and imposing temple was largely destroyed, apart from the floors beneath the surface, and the Jedi wondered how they were going to escape or even contact other rebels. When Ezra spotted one of the remnants of their own battle, he realised that the Inquisitors the Maul themselves had defeated must have arrived on a form of transportation. Moving outside of the radius of the explosion caused by the temple's obelisk, the Jedi ignited their lightsabers so Ezra could search the area, and soon he spotted several TIE Advanced V1s. Though Maul had taken one of the ships during his escape from the planet, one of the remaining ships was in working condition. The incredibly narrow space was the least of their current problems, but nevertheless an inconvenience, as they looked at the Navi computer and decided to travel to one of the closest wells in their system, which was Zygeria. The former bastion for the Slave Empire was a shell of its former self, but Kanan and Ezra knew better than to let their guard down as they searched for a way to contact the rebels. With the HoloNet tightly controlled by the Empire, the Jedi had to resort to mind tricks to acquire a ship with a subspace transceiver. Ezra communicated a code message to the rebel group on Lothal, which was only used by the Ghost Crew in the event of an emergency, hoping that Hera would understand the message. Back on Lothal, the signal sent by Ezra had reached Hera and the other rebels, but they weren't in the best position to issue a response. In the time that Ezra and Kanan had travelled between worlds, the rebels had received their own information that Darth Vader would be arriving on their planet, and they realised that the Jedi had gotten themselves into trouble. But even Hera had no idea where they went after their meeting with the Rebel High Command, so with Chopper and Zeb, she boarded the Ghost to start her own search. Piloting the freighter to known destinations such as the abandoned transmitter tower, Hera eventually received a faint signal from Luke as she entered the planet's northern hemisphere. Ordering Chopper to try and trace a more accurate location for the signal, the Twi'lek's combat display showed a faint signal overhead, and Vader's TIE Advanced Starfighter zoomed past her, with 2 TIE Fighter escorts. Hera maintained her low altitude, wary of the threat posed by Vader, and now Chopper pinpointed Luke's signal to the Lothal Jedi Temple. Though Hera was familiar with the route, when she arrived at the temple, Vader had already reached it before her, and the scene was one of chaos. After Ahsoka and Luke had found their portal, they were immediately confronted by Minister Hydan, but wasting no time, they attached several detonators to the portal's entrance, then leapt for cover. The ensuing explosion destroyed the portal, Hydan and most of the excavation team, but the others in the nearby encampment rushed to avenge their fallen comrades. Ahsoka and Luke ignited their lightsabers to deflect the incoming attacks, and Luke summoned Hera from the rebel base with his transceiver. As Imperial reinforcements arrived considerably faster than those of the rebels, the ultimate form of opposition joined them as Ahsoka sensed Vader approaching them. Just as it seemed that the scales had been tipped in favour of the Empire, a small pack of Lothwolves emerged from the mountains and galloped to the Empire, whilst they also growled at the sight of Vader. The Sith imperiously levitated downwards from his ship, and first taking the time to mock his old apprentice, he told her that this time she would not get away. Turning to Luke, he had not seen this young Jedi before, but there was an air of familiarity about him, but he would treat him like all the other Jedi he had met, and that was with contempt. Igniting his lightsaber, the wolves were ready to attack the malicious Force presence, but Vader went for Luke first. The Sith wanted to test the capabilities of the younger Jedi, and delving into a series of powerful moves, he could see that Luke had been trained by a Jedi warrior. Having been advised by Obi-Wan of what to do if he encountered Vader, Luke resorted to the Jedi Master's patented Form 3 to try and wear down the Sith. Ahsoka was trying to take advantage of Luke's defensive strategy, but after her encounter with the World Between Worlds, she was feeling tired, so she motioned for the Lothwolves to coordinate an attack. Vader was unaware of the nature of these beasts, and attempting to force push them away, he was surprised when they showed natural resistance, so he moved to attack them with his lightsaber. Luke leapt to the defense of the Lothwolves, and as their blades locked, Vader now saw the hilt that once belonged to Anakin Skywalker, and the brief moment of surprise allowed his former apprentice to force push him into the closest hillside. As the rebels were about to move in, Luke's comlink flashed into life, and Hera ordered him to stop his movement as she swooped in to fire the front-mounted laser cannon at Vader. As the rebels leapt out of the way of Hera's attack, Luke and Ahsoka mounted the Lothwolves, then told the Twi'lek that they would meet her back at the rebel base. Taking one last look at the rubble above Vader, the Jedi galloped to the tunnel where they returned to the base before Hera. In his throne room on Coruscant, Emperor Palpatine had just sensed a disturbance in the Force, as if his apprentice had just landed himself into trouble. The Sith Lord had just spoken to Minister Hydan on Lothal, but now he was also missing, and getting out of the comfort of his throne, the Sith asked for his ship to be ready for departure. The news that Palpatine was leaving Coruscant was transferred from rebel spies to the rebel high command, and they warned the resistance group on Lothal to evacuate, in case they brought a fleet far larger than they could handle. Having just returned from Malachor and heard about the defeat of Vader, Ezra wanted to capitalise on their advantage and proceeded with the plan to retake the dome, but Hera disagreed, stating that they needed to know more about the enemy. Ezra was overruled, but knew that his superiors were right in their assessment, and the Ghost Crew and Ahsoka were given special dispensation to travel to Alderaan. After the rebels escaped Lothal, Palpatine made his way to the Outer Rim planet, disgusted by the lack of progress. Not only had the blockade been destroyed, but he had also lost all the pieces to the World Between Worlds aboard Thrawn's Chimera, and now it seemed that the Annoyance on Lothal had become a threat. Landing in the Northern Hemisphere, and more specifically the remains of the battle, he spotted his apprentice amongst the wreckage. Palpatine sensed the pulse of life within Vader, and branding him pathetic for failing such a simple task, he told him that he would not help him get up, so he would learn the lesson for the price of failure. Boarding his ship to the dome, Palpatine looked around with the same look of disgust as he had done with Vader as he looked at the incompetence on display. Searching the complex for any potential candidates to become the next governor of Lothal, the Sith Lord suddenly felt a warning in the Force, and his royal guards were ushering him back to his ship. Though Ezra had agreed to leave Lothal, Hera gave him permission to leave presents behind for the Emperor's visit, and with most of the Empire's forces destroyed in the aerial battle, or diverted to the portal, Ezra and Sabine found it unnervingly easy to infiltrate the dome. Using the largely vacant hangar bay near the summit, the two rebels placed detonators in strategic locations, all to be set off by former Governor Azadi from a remote location. His knowledge of the complex also allowed him to activate the planetary shields through the reprogramming of one of the many astromech droids roaming the area, and now Palpatine was ordering the shields to be lowered. But the absence of most of the Imperials made this a near impossible task, and attempting to blast his way out, the result was a shockwave that was so violent that it was felt across the planet. Vader had been on the edge of consciousness after Hera's attack, and the shockwave caused by the fall of Palpatine was enough to send more rubble onto his head, and he followed the road of his master. On the world of Alderaan, the defeat of the Sith was reported to the rebels on the planet, and jubilation was the common reaction because it symbolised the potential downfall of the rest of the Empire. But for the two past and present Fulcrums, the mood was more sombre, with the loss of Vader in the Force, so they now vowed to tell Luke about the legend of Anakin Skywalker.